folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here to talk about the defense from Week 3, the big win against the Cowboys on Sunday. And joining me to do that is Nick Mehta. Nick, how you doing?
Doing great. Feeling a lot better with the team being 1-2 as opposed to 0-3, which really just would have been a tough situation to battle out of, especially with their matchups in the next couple of weeks.
It's a world of difference. I know you and I, analysts who follow the team very closely, it can definitely affect your mood as the season goes on to have problems. At 2015, which is, I retired that year to cover the Ravens full time. It was really a very difficult year to get through the season. But, the recent Lamar teams, we've gotten a little spoiled, and they really haven't had a stretch like this other than times when Lamar's been hurt.
Yeah. I mean, 2021 was the first year that I was covering the Ravens at the level that I am now. And that was definitely, a lot of injuries that year. And that was a big year of setbacks. But I think that the losing games that you should have won and being 0-3 to start a season is a very different kind of setback, because it's all self-inflicted. It's a situation that you shouldn't be in. Injuries, there's not a lot you can do about it. It was a tough rash of injuries, but going 0-3 to start a season like this is a big question about what have you been doing? What have the coaches been doing? What have the players been doing? And instead, getting this win in Dallas was very stabilizing, it felt like.
Yeah, a lot of things came out of it that were very good in terms of offensive identity and whatnot. And we're going to get into some of that. Obviously, we're starting on the defensive side here, but there's a big development today, and we're recording this on Monday night at 10 p.m. There's a big development today with the Ravens reportedly signing Yannick Ngakoue again for a return to Baltimore. He was here, I guess it's been 4 years now, in 2020, right? Or 21.
Right. Yeah, he came as a trade deadline acquisition, if I remember correctly, yep. And just never really seemed to find his footing in Baltimore. There was some talk about whether it was dissatisfaction with his role or just his role in this defense wasn't a great fit. He, as a physical edge defender against the run, is not really the kind of mold that he fits, and it's traditionally the mold of outside linebacker that we see. But as just a kind of hand in the dirt designated pass rusher is the role that he really excels in, and it felt like he really never found his footing. That was again the Wink Martindale defense, a lot of heavy blitzes, and a very different situation for a pass rusher for who most of his career was just going after matchups on the edge, basically.
Yeah, those Wink teams relied very heavily on outside linebacker numbers to fuel their rush nickel, rush dime, and race car packages. Now, the rush packages, as I define them, have 3 outside linebackers, and the race car packages have 4 or more. We saw actually Martindale put 5 on the field 6 times in 2018. But they were able to make use of multiple outside linebackers. This Ravens team has a very stable interior pass rush. They have 3 guys who can really rush the passer from the interior: Pierce, Travis Jones, and Madubuike, of course. But the outside linebacker group is a little bit weak. And if anything, I think the signing of Ngakoue is a little bit of an indictment of David Ajabo's play to date.
Yes, and I think that Ojabo had that really exciting sack in week 1, and that got everyone really excited about his return. But for him, the big deal is always consistency, and not just consistency within a game, but game-to-game consistency, something that showed up in the Dallas game that I'm sure we'll hit on later. And with the Ngakoue, I think it's just you sign a guy to the practice squad, you get him up to speed, you elevate him and see what he can give you. And then you make a decision about adding to the 53-man roster and seeing where it goes from there. It's a very low risk, high upside kind of addition, the kind of mercenary addition that the Ravens made with Kyle Van Noy last year. And we've seen how that has developed. And you hope Ngakoue can kind of land in a better role in this defense.
So very different signing in a lot of ways from the recent outside linebackers they've had. Now, Jason Pierre-Paul and Justin Houston and Van Noy, who've all been successful. Clowney, we're all 30 and older. Okay, and Yannick Ngakoue, amazingly, is still only 29 years old. And it's really not a young player, but there's been a lot of older pass rushers the Ravens have gotten really good mileage out of. So I kind of wonder a couple things. First of all, is Ngakoue now a vet min guy? Because he'd have to be pretty close to that for the Ravens to sign him. So that'd be one question. And 2 is, what sort of a role are they envisioning for him in terms of what snaps he will play?
On the contract side, to me, if a guy signs to the practice squad a couple of years into the season, he's probably going to be a vet min guy. I think it's very hard from a negotiating standpoint to come in and say, give me guaranteed money, give me, even $4 million for a season, because no one else wanted to sign him. And he kind of needs to get to the point that Van Noy got to, where he is a mercenary pass rusher who's, again, Van Noy was in a similar position where he wasn't in demand. And I think it's, a little interesting. He didn't really seem to test the market that much this offseason. He really seemed pretty intent on coming back to Baltimore, and the Ravens felt the same way. I think a smart move by both sides. It'll be interesting to see if Ngakoue can kind of build back up to what he was kind of in Jacksonville, and even had a pretty good season in Las Vegas in 2021. I felt like on the other side of that pass rush with Max Crosby, not maybe as devastating as he was early in his career in Jacksonville, but still very effective. And, adding him into this pass rush as, kind of a designated pass rusher, you can get him in that role and kind of work matchups for him. I think that is a much better fit for his skill set and what he brings to the team. I think, again, low risk. To me, that's the big thing coming out of this, is there's very little risk in this signing.
Yeah, that's really the point to hit on here. And the Ravens, they don't have a lot of cap, period, to make frivolous vet min signings. So they, practice squad signing is perfect because they're paying that money to somebody, whether it's him or another player. The Ravens have in the past, and this happened in 21, I think. It might have been 20 as well when Ngakoue was actually here. But it happened that they've been actually minimizing the number of roster spots week to week to save money against the cap, which is that's your team's really scraping the bottom of the barrel. The Ravens are not quite in that bad a situation. They've got about, I think, 5-6 million of cap right now that they can spend as they go through the year, but they can't afford to make additional frivolous signings. They just don't have a lot of money to spend this year, and they can't borrow it from next year, without it hurting them then. So as a team's got to be careful.
Right. And again, Ngakoue is he's going to need a minute to catch up. I think he had a broken, I want to say, ankle in week 14 of last season. So he's going to have to get all the way back up to full physical strength in Baltimore, get familiar with the defense. And then, like I said, they have those 3 practice squad elevations. Like you said about how the team is kind of being very frugal in how they're spending their cap. It wouldn't surprise me if they use those elevations first, because if they sign Ngakoue even later in the season, his vet minimum salary is prorated for the amount of games remaining, not for the entire season. So it's just little bits that they're saving. And while, like you said, they're not in that dire of a position, we know Eric DeCosta is going to be working the phones at the trade deadline, trying to make a move from a team that he thinks is selling low on a guy.
Let me address the last point for just a second. If he's signed for the vet minimum now and comes up on the team in week 2 or later, which he would be, my understanding is he's a pay to play player on a week to week basis. Now you can't, if you elevate him to the 53, he's paid for however many weeks he plays in Baltimore. And if you cut him at, say, week 8, because you say, well, he can't play anymore, you save the rest of his salary. So I think they're paying him week to week, the vet minimum, as after they use the elevations. Let's put it that way.
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. And by doing that later, they're saving even that 3 weeks of cap space. And again, for a team that's I'm not going to say strapped, they have room, but they really want to preserve that room to make a move, not be a frivolous kind of an extra edge rush guy. Right.
Gotcha. Okay. So there is some increment to pay. Some of this I know from working with Brian, of course, over the years, because he's very knowledgeable, but also from just talking to Jeremy Lucien last year about his situation. There is an increment to pay you get when you're activated the roster that's very significant, because you go up from the salary squad pay to the active roster pay. And I don't know if that's the full vet minimum or if there's some other amount that they make, but it might be the full vet minimum for a player like Ngakoue. So I'm not sure, even with elevations, I mean, there probably is some less risk because you get to retain somebody on the 53, but I'm not sure there's a win in terms of dollars during those elevations anyway. Esoteric point, but we'll move on. Anyway, we really want to talk about the Ravens win against the Cowboys. You could be a glasses half empty or a glasses half full guy on this, but where do you stand on it?
So I was really, really enjoying the game. I was, going into the fourth quarter, it felt like very comfortable lead. It felt like many games that we've seen this team play against NFC teams in the last several years. They did not have answers for Lamar. The defense was physical and just beating them at really all points up front, downfield. And then the little things started to slip away. And the issue was that it was some of the same things. You had a special teams mishap. It was really tough to see Justin Tucker miss 2 more kicks. And some officiating that just felt like I really am tired of having to mention officiating, but I do think it merits mentioning because, you see multiple calls again this week that just did not add up, especially that roughing the passer, that intentional grounding that should have been a safety. That to me was a huge loophole that the NFL has yet to explain. And to me, that accountability is really important.
The explanation given to Harbaugh is complete crap. I read the rule. I mean, I know you've had a year of law school, if I recall correctly. Yes. I had to deal with a lot of contracts in my work, insurance contracts, which means you have to understand how rules work and understand that. And I'll tell you, I read the thing. It is clear as freaking day. And in fact, Mike Pereira on air said, if that was in the end zone, then they revert to intentional grounding. But there's no reason why you can't throw both flags.
Right. That's just what I was going to say, is that the referees seem to say that the illegal touching superseded the intentional grounding.
Nope.
But you're supposed to throw both flags, and then the team against whom the penalty was committed actually gets to choose. And the Ravens obviously would have chosen the safety. To me, that very much changes. I think a lot of people with penalties, especially, you don't want to say that one play really changes the outcome of the game. That game changes how that play changes how the rest of that game plays out.
And even if you throw both flags, let me just say this, you don't have to announce both flags, because the only one that matters in that situation is the intentional grounding. The illegal touch would carry half the distance to the goal line rules with it. The intentional grounding, as I understand it, does not. It's spot of the foul, loss of down. So it is in all ways a superseding foul for virtually anything else. The only other thing that you can match up with it would be like a personal foul that would be an extra 15 yards that you would tack on, even if there's multiple on the same play. So I'm so bothered by this. I have a really hard time getting over it in terms of how this was called, and then the BS that it seemed like cover themselves kind of logic. And I believe Harbaugh is underhandedly saying that at the podium today. He basically wanted to say, your explanation is a bunch of crap, but I can't say that because to do so would get me fined. So I'm going to tell everybody what the explanation you gave me was, and then I'll let you figure it out in terms of what that was.
Yeah, and that frustration, and this has been again a thing with the Ravens, where the special teams mishap, the flags don't go their way, and it just feels like things start to come unglued. I feel like there is a sense of getting stuck in what happened and in what way were they wronged just now, what just happened that they messed up, instead of moving on to the next play and kind of just saying, okay, 1st and 10, we got to keep going. And so that, to me, was kind of where the game started to unravel for the Ravens. And I grew more and more frustrated, partially with the officiating, partially of just watching them start to blow a 4th quarter lead once again, something that we've just seen all too often from this team.
Yeah, there was one central moment, and the Tucker missed kick would have, maybe there's two, but the Tucker missed kick, if they go up by 25 at that point, I think the Cowboys fold up right there. They might have even replaced Prescott to remove the injury risk, but I think at least they would have slowed down their game, gone with a no alacrity offense, huddled up normally, and just basically run the clock out on themselves. Maybe run the football a little bit more, but throw it around a little bit, but not take chances with Prescott anyway. Would have been, and Lamb would have been the central focus of that game. But as it was, because it was only how many points was it? Whatever it was 22 points instead of 25 points. Then it's still in less than 3 score games. They figured, okay, we'll try and score. They did, and then the second horrible thing happened, which was the onside kick and the flub by Flowers, which is not getting enough run in terms of just how damaging that miss was. It put the defense on the field a second time in a row. They're tired already, and this made it worse.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of desire after the first 2 games to make every remaining game a referendum on John Harbaugh, and that's just not the kind of thing that I find very interesting or productive. I will say, though, for such a special teams-oriented coach, continuing to see these one-offs where it just feels like they're not ready enough. They're not ready enough for this kind of special team situation is a little frustrating. And, you have your hands team in there. They announced the onside kick. There's no surprise. It really should not, like you said, it really should not have happened. And that, again, put the defense back on the field. And so when you look at how the defense performed in this game, it, to me, is kind of reminiscent of the Kansas City game in a little bit of a reverse way, where it really felt like the Ravens had a handle on the Kansas City game for most of that game. And the offense kind of slowed down and was putting the defense in these tough positions. In this game, it felt like the offense was not even on the field, right? Like the special teams mishap. You miss a field goal and you're just putting the defense in these really short fields with these two special teams mishaps where the offense moved the ball down the field. They got into field goal range, what should be comfortable field goal range, and put them up. Same thing with the onside kick. Special teams couldn't get the job done. Suddenly defense is back out on the field, kind of, again, in a tough position.
Yeah, it definitely, one of the things that was annoying again to this game, and this bothers me a lot, is going into a game, any game, with 4 defensive linemen. So the Ravens were, in a game against Cowboys who don't run the ball well, really don't run the ball much at all either. And so they rely heavily on their passing game. You think it's not important to have Brent Urban in there. Brent Urban still does things for you in the passing game. He can knock down a pass. He can compress the pocket a little bit for somebody else to make a play. He can occasionally get a cleanup sack himself. He almost never will be the first guy to the quarterback. That's true. But it doesn't mean that he hurts you a lot. What I think, and this goes back to your point about special teams, is we've watched the Ravens all summer in camp prepare an incredible amount for the new dynamic kickoff. I think it's actually, you're better off making it a 0 variance play by kicking off, giving the team the ball at the 30-yard line for reasons of injury, for reasons of variance of outcome when you're a good team. And we saw Kansas City do that. The Ravens certainly fall into the category of being, a team that's good enough to win with a yard and a half difference in field goal position. And then, more importantly, is the extra roster space it gives you. Because if you need one less guy on your roster to cover kicks, or to be sure you can get through a game covering kicks and punts, then you can have a Brent Urban and you don't have to worry about being short a defensive lineman at some point. Now, they weren't actually short a defensive lineman. They were short a rested defensive lineman in the fourth quarter of this game.
That is exactly where I was going to go with that. I'm glad you said that, because to me, again, this defense just felt tired in the fourth quarter. It felt like they were constantly on their heels, and they could never regain their balance, especially with Dallas playing some of this hurry up, because they obviously recognized, hey, we've seen 99, 92, 58, 98 for 85% of these snaps. They're going to be gassed by now. And the pass rush fell off in the fourth quarter. And sure, you don't need Urban for that. You need Urban to kind of spell these guys earlier in the game and just do what he does really well, which is just come in, do his job, not make big errors. He's not bursting through the line, making splash plays. He's not ripping around guards for sacks, but he is just competent, high quality, dependable snaps on the interior. And that way you have Jones and Pierce, who are two very large human beings, better rested for the fourth quarter when they can when they can go ahead and make one of those game-changing plays that they're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. So very, very frustrating in that. I hope they don't deactivate Urban again this year. And I'm thinking about the way the kickoff is run right now. Why on earth would Brent Urban not be a fairly utile player in the middle of a kickoff coverage scheme when a lot of that is two-gapping? So, you're effectively two-gapping a guy opposite you. You put him in a position where the flow of the kick you're trying to cover can go around him or close to him by kicking it to his side. I don't think you're playing with a huge disadvantage in that, even if he was the guy who had to come out there. And there's probably no reason, because in a typical game, I think you go into with maybe 13, 14 guys who can play your 11-unit punt coverage or kick coverage positions.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see teams play with things a little bit more over the course of the year. But at the end of the day, I think saving that roster spot and going with the 0 variance, like you said, is the best option, because the advantage of happening to land a kick in just the right spot with just the right coverage of pushing them back from, the 30 to the 23 just doesn't make that much of a difference. To me, there's still such an advantage to really both sides to just come out at the 30 and let it go and get going on offense and defense. I think that is quickly going to become the meta in the league. I think teams are going to recognize that there's no value in giving up these, 45 plus yard returns consistently. And we're moving them back 7 yards. I just think the risk is not worth it.
Yeah. Let's switch over to why the glass is half full from this game and talk a little bit about some of the real positives that came out of it. I think, we can look at it. They played 49 minutes of great football to start this game. And they played 3 minutes of great football to end it too, by the way. So we're talking about 8 minutes where things really went south on them. But during those 49 minutes at the start, they dominated on both sides of the ball. I think the offense in particular really found an identity in this game that they can latch on to. I don't think they really found that in either of the first two games. Didn't find the one method they were going to win by. They ran the ball effectively in both games, not like in this game. And this is a game where I think, a 3-to-1 rush to pass ratio, you don't have to do that every game. Not if the game script demands otherwise, but that's a really nice formula that will beat a lot of teams.
When you can set your game script to be that way, you're in good shape. I think that this is an example of the offense that the Ravens have tried to design in which they can beat you any way they choose. I think they're still working in all those different ways that they can beat you into one cohesive game plan, as opposed to just kind of really picking one and sticking with it for a whole game. But it's week 3 and they needed a win against a really, really bad Cowboys interior defensive line. So I think that they just pick the right game plan. To me, I don't have an issue at all with how Monken decided to approach that game and deciding to run the ball so heavily. To me, we need a win. And I also think that there's a lot of long-term upside for their offense and how often they were under center and how much more comfortable they can get in that scheme. So, the offense certainly played well. The defense, again, the run defense did their thing. I'm not even sure how much we'll get to talking about the run defense during this podcast, because there isn't that much to say other than everyone's doing their jobs. Everyone's seeing things really well. Something I've noticed in past years with the Ravens and a lot of teams in the NFL is that tackling can be very much a work in progress over the early portion of the season. I've not felt like that with the Ravens this year as compared to years past. I felt like the tackling has been very solid for the most part. Obviously, there are going to be some missed tackles. And again, I think it's something people don't think about as much, which is it's early in the season. Starters, you're getting used to doing this again. And it is a very physical play to try and bring down, Derrick Henry, sure, but there are plenty of really talented ball carriers in this league that are tough to bring down. And so I think that the tackling and their physicality early on really set the tone against that Dallas offense that has this kind of free-flowing nature. They like to run, they like to get in space, and they never were in space. The Ravens didn't give them any space in the run game. And for a lot of, really, I would say, majority of the first half and much of the third quarter, they didn't have any space in the passing game either.
It's been one of the things about Dallas this year is they basically forced no missed tackles on the run. I think Elliott might have had 1 missed tackle forced in 2 games coming into this, and they might have had 4 for the offense. For the running back group. Dowdle might have had the other 3, but it wasn't much. I mean, there's very, very little, and that's using PFF missed tackle statistics, which are frankly very liberal in terms of missed tackles forced and very stringent in terms of missed tackles counted against defenders. What PFF calls a missed tackle is like, boy, that's a tough missed tackle sometimes where a player has to dive, gets around the ankles of a player, but be a low percentage tackle and they'll still count it. But I still like having a single definition that I believe is used correctly across multiple teams to look at, as opposed to something where I can't really get behind the methodology. Anyway, that's just a sidelight there. I want to get to what I think is the biggest single thing about this game was I think we saw a positive move from Zach Orr in terms of adaptability game to game versus the team as well. So we talked about the offense, but this is a defense show, but the move to the dime defense in this game to me speaks volumes about Orr's evolution as a coach very positively, because it's the counter current to who he is as a player and who the Ravens have been the last few years with the Patrick Queen and Roquan tandem forcing or creating a committed nickel situation.
And it is a direct response to what opponents had been exploiting over the first
Yep.
2 weeks of the season, which is those linebackers in coverage over the middle of the field. It happened a couple times in the Dallas game, but for the most part, having that extra defensive back on the field, it did two things. One, you just having more DBs, you're better off in coverage in general, whether it's man or zone. And I felt like Orr ran a good bit more man coverage in this game than he had in the first two games. I felt like that was, again, a product of being able to have these 6 or 7 defensive backs on the field and being a lot more comfortable in your matchups with guys in the slot instead of having Simpson, come over into the slot and then someone motions from out wide and suddenly you're in a situation you don't want to be in man coverage. Well, if you have defensive backs covering all those spots, you can just mix and match as you please. And I feel like he delivered the changeups, and I think it surprised Dallas. It surprised Prescott, who is known for just being a kind of a quarterback's quarterback and really playing in the pocket and sorting through defenses pre and post snap. And he couldn't see anything in the first half. I thought Orr did a great job of disguising his coverages, mixing them up, especially in comparison to what he had put on film the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, it definitely had limits in terms of what you can do with 2 inside linebackers on the field. And, it's interesting because Simpson played very well in a more focused role, which I'm very positive about that, by the way. And, I came into this season just basically of the opinion that we don't know who Trenton Simpson is. We've only seen him for one game against Pittsburgh. A little bit of preseason action is not enough to really know who the guy is. And also the run defense hadn't been particularly good in the preseason. So I really didn't even know if he was going to be a third down player, primarily with maybe Malik Harrison taking some of his first down snaps as happened against Kansas City. Or if he was going to be a guy who the Ravens would want to have on for 3 downs, or maybe only have on for 2 downs, and you go to a dime on third down. Well, it turns out that third category appears to be the way the Ravens are heading. It doesn't mean it's a permanent selection, but I really love dime defense for lots of reasons. And I don't know how much you've listened to the show in the past, but a huge fan of the dime in terms of where it fits in terms of Ravens history. And in particular, the basic precept is that your third best coverage safety is always or almost always going to be a better coverage player than your second best coverage off-ball linebacker. And the Ravens certainly have that situation. And I really don't remember a time ever in their history other than maybe the Bart Scott era when they didn't have that situation be true.
And I think that also speaks volumes about their development of the safety position, always having guys that are just ready to come in and play, whether they are traditional deep safeties like Eddie Jackson, or, you think about like a Tony Jefferson dimebacker kind of guy who was able to come in and, play over the middle of the field a lot. And I think that they've gone back and forth, and you would definitely know a lot more about this than I would, but in the history, they've gone back and forth quite a bit over their usage of dime over the years.
Yep.
And it feels like every time that they've figured out, okay, we can get pressure with 4, our defensive linemen can get pressure, that's when they start to feel comfortable playing more and more dime, because of how often otherwise they would like to use those. They not would like to, I guess they feel like they need to use those linebackers as blitzers. When they don't feel the need to force pressure by using those linebackers as blitzers because they're getting pressure with 4, then you're able to do exactly what they did against Dallas, which is just crowd everything downfield and really trust that front 4 to be very disciplined against the run, which they are, and get some good pressure on Prescott, which they did as well. And I felt like that, you said it early on, that adaptability is something that was very signature of Mike Macdonald, his ability to game plan and adapt game to game, and seeing Orr's willingness to say, hey, I love Trenton Simpson. I love Roquan Smith. I'm a linebacker. We got to take Trenton Simpson off the field for some of these snaps because we got to go out and win this game. And, say, okay, those are some developmental snaps he's going to miss. Now, he played plenty in this game, so I'm not worried about that. But being able to really look through all the different variables going on and say, okay, this is the path we need to take in this game. I think that is the kind of most Macdonald-esque thing I was excited to see about Orr in this game.
Yeah, I go a step further and say it's something that needs to be adapted in game, because game script has a lot to do with the usage of dime. If you look at this game, they played dime basically the entire fourth quarter. I don't think it was a bad package, by the way. The defense was tired. The pass rush was tired in terms of getting some things done. They allowed a lot of ample time and space opportunities in the fourth quarter to Prescott, but they did have legitimately good cover on the field in that fourth quarter, and I think they did fairly well given the circumstances. But that, it's something. If I look back, another famous game in Ravens history, in Jackson's first MVP year, he had that evisceration of the Rams 45-6 in LA. That game, they played from about the middle of the third quarter, I want to say, they played the dime defense every snap from there for the rest of the game. And it's like, if you can get to the point in the game where you have a big lead like that and the other team, you basically dare them to run the football and see if they will. And you know what? I don't think I've ever seen this before, but after the successful onside kick, they ran the football on the first play from scrimmage. And I'm commenting that I cannot ever remember that happening before.
Yeah, and I think I even felt like in your charting would probably have a better specific example of this, but I even felt like the amount of dime they put out in the first half, their willingness to have that even in the first half was still daring the Cowboys to run the ball, because as we talked about early, the Cowboys are just not a good rushing offense. Their running backs are not good. Their scheme is not diverse at all. They don't hit different runs. They don't have many counters. They don't have a lot of misdirection in their run game at all with pullers pulling one way, the run going. They really don't have much of that. And that enables you to take the talent advantage you have in the trenches and press it, because they're not doing anything to disrupt that talent advantage. They're basically saying, we're going to take these blockers, or we're going to take these linemen head on with our blockers and try and win our matchups and push and get yardage that way. And against Pierce and Jones and Madubuike, and I felt like Washington even had a better game against the run, that's not going to work. Not with that Cowboys offensive line. So I think that was kind of it was interesting to see Orr be willing to kind of throw out the changeup early, and especially in some of those obvious passing situations, and just say, look, we dare you. If you really want to try and press us that way, if that's how you're going to beat us, fine. But we are not going to let you beat us the same way that teams have been beating us.
Just to address that, 7 snaps of dime in the first half, and most of that was on obvious passing downs. Last drive of the first half, and they had 30 seconds or something. They had it out there on first down, and then 1 snap of quarter, and that one really backfired. Unfortunately, they had 7 defensive backs on the field. They still gave up the 31-yard play to Lamb that got them the field goal at the end of the half that made.
Attention sports fans, do you love winning? Of course you do. That's why you need to check out Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million members. And it's super easy. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 players, stat projections, sit back and watch the winnings roll in. How about a guaranteed win every week in September? Yep, just one Caleb Williams passing yard gets you a win each football weekend this month. That's 4 weeks of easy W's. But don't sleep on it. This deal vanishes when September ends. But wait, there's more. Worried about injuries ruining your lineup? Relax. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. If your player leaves the game in the first half and doesn't return, your lineup stays in play. No more stressing over those unexpected injuries. This weekend, I'm taking Derrick Henry for more than 70 yards and Daniel Jones for less than 193 passing yards. 2 picks that I feel great about. And the best part is you can win up to 100 times your money with just 4 correct picks. So what are you waiting for? Download the Prize Pick app today and use the code RAVENS to get $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's right, $50 free just for giving it a shot. More winning, less stressing. Prize Picks is where the fun begins.
This game helped make this game a lot closer than it should have been.
Yeah, I think that's an example of something that I think is natural for a first-time defensive coordinator. We saw it with Mike Macdonald, which is, especially in those very compressed tight situations, having some extremely conservative coverage schemes, and that kind of biting you in the butt, because a receiver like Lamb is going to be able to identify that and identify the soft spots. And that is what happened in the past with Macdonald. I think it's another, I think, like we said, Orr's adaptability is something that I, saw in this game. And I think that we're going to continue to see him evolve over the course of the season.
All right. Let's move on a little bit. And what do I want to talk about next? Let me bring up my outline here again. Oh, there it is. Okay. Snap count, they lost pretty heavily in this game, 70-60. It's not that big a deal, but obviously because the Ravens won the game easily, but they had fairly short drives. One of the things that I didn't like was they took a very cowardly lion kind of approach on fourth down. So they gave some analytics guys would really get off on them a lot more than I would, but they did not go after the Cowboys to try and make them spend more time defensively on the field.
Yeah, and I'm not an analytics guy per se. I leave that to the real spreadsheet warriors. But I like to say I'm analytics adjacent because I have a lot of good friends who are analytics. It's something I really keep up with, especially for my battle plans, game previews for Rush Street Report. And every time Harbaugh is thinking about going forward on fourth down, I'm like, go for it. These are the times. These are the times where you step on their necks. And we kind of talked about this at the beginning of the game, kind of how this game slipped away from them a little bit. I think not being willing to go for it on fourth down hurt them a couple times, especially with, Tucker dealing with whatever issue he's dealing with, whatever technique thing he's working on, whatever it is. Far be it from me to go assess Justin Tucker's kicker game. Clearly something is not ideal, but deciding to go conservative to the max instead of going on an aggressive field goal. Okay, you don't feel like you're going to make an aggressive field goal attempt, so you go max conservative by punting, even though it was a better game by Jordan Stout for sure. I think that with Lamar and the success that you were having on offense, not being willing to say we are going to go out and get 3 yards is disappointing from a coach that we have seen has been willing to go out there and do it. And to me, the disappointment is compounded because I can't remember if I specifically saw this or not, but I know it. Lamar wants to go for those. Lamar is ready to go out and get those yards. And I think a lot of people like to blow up, team discontent and this and that. But I do think there is a sense to which Lamar's leader of the team, the leader of the offense. And I'm not saying you have to bow to his whim and go for every 4th and 6 out there. But if he's out there pushing to go for the fourth down, him and Derrick Henry multiple times, I think you take one of those shots. I think it was the fact that there were 3 of them, like you said, that were cowardly, that really bothers me.
Yeah, so the 3, let's be specific about this. The first one came in the first half, and it was 4th and 1.5, roughly, and listed as 4th and 1 in the game book. Harbaugh might have thought it was too far. It's an obvious go for it situation from that point on the field. And, analytics guys would basically be pulling their hair out, telling you that that's the right call. But they they were around the 45-yard line, I think. And they came to the line of scrimmage and they tried to draw the Cowboys offsides. They were all earmuffed up for the play, so it didn't fall for it. And the Ravens just took the penalty, which, by the way, is the correct call there. There's no need to call a timeout and waste double on the situation. But the right call for starters is maybe to fake that you're going to just try and draw the other team off. Maybe start, get up, go back down, have how teams often do, where oh no, this is a fake now. And then go ahead and run the snap. Would love to see it. We got 2 more. You want to talk about that one? Go ahead, and then we'll go to the other 2.
Right. If there's nothing precluding you there's never anything precluding you from going up and trying to draw them off sides. And like you said, they didn't do something they've done in the past, which is try to draw them off sides and then panic and run a play or take a timeout. And I think those 2 things they avoided. And so to me, it's like, it's not a fail, but it's also not an A grade on those calls because it's just such obvious go for it situations where, there are just so many different things you can do. Like you said, you can go up, you can have guys move around, you can use motion a couple times and then quick snap the ball. There's just so many different things you can do in that situation. Or like I said, it's 1.5 yards. Go get the 2 yards.
Yeah. Yeah, and all of these situations were kind of similar, so I'm going to hit on the other 2 as well. The second situation was the Tucker missed field goal. So, the Tucker missed field goal. It was 4th and 2 on that play. if there's any question about a 46-yard field goal, you don't take it. Now, honestly, with the game really seemed out of hand at that point, it's a 22-point lead. 25 points is a lot more. And in retrospect, we're going to look at this and say, oh, we knew all along. We didn't really know all along. It looked like the Ravens were basically had a chokehold on the Cowboys at that point in the game, and they weren't coming back. So trying to get Tucker right with a relatively easy 46-yard field goal that's, certainly within his range, maybe isn't that bad a play, but it was definitely a bad play from an analytics point and from a getting the game over standpoint with your defense. Forcing the Cowboys defense to stay on the field for longer. I really didn't like that play.
Yeah, I think that with Tucker, you have to look at the situation and decide what the risk of him missing the kick is compared to the reward. And it's really hard to second guess that decision. I think that is the one that I look at and I say, okay, that is a very makeable kick for Justin Tucker. There's really very little reason that he shouldn't make that kick. I get that one. Absolutely. To me, though, now I'm looking for Harbaugh to next week adjust and say, okay, in that same situation, let me get aggressive. Let me keep the ball in the hands of the guys who have been rolling this whole game. And, I don't want to knock Tucker's confidence, but honestly, I think not putting Tucker on the field at this point, his confidence is where it's at. I'm not sure, you can knock a guy like that. He misses a couple of kicks and his confidence goes way down because he's supposed to be making every one. I also think when you start playing games with, I want to put that guy in the field to get him confidence. I think that's when you are not paying attention to what's really important, which is winning the game. So I'm very pro analytics, aggressively going forward on fourth down. I think that is something that Harbaugh has, to me, backed off of since his peak of it, I would say in 2021. And now looking back on it, it feels like that aggression was less analytics and more, I don't want to say desperation, but not wanting to prolong the game because you feel like you're going to have a bigger chance of losing it in overtime. You'd rather take the 50-50 on the 2-point conversion or the fourth down that you go for because they were so shorthanded in those years. And now that they have these talented teams, he's almost feeling more conservative. Whereas to me, I press that advantage. I say we have been kicking their butts up and down the field on offense. We've been moving the ball. The offensive line has had a get right game, or at least a get stable game. And I think that aggression, to me, is something I'm looking for him from the rest of the season.
Yeah, I hope I'll help him do it. But he had another chance, and that came after the second touchdown had made it 28-18. They came up with a 4th and 3 opportunity again. And this time they were at the 40-yard line. So Stout ended up kicking a 31-yard, punting for 31 yards to get the ball down to the 9-yard line. That has value. I'm not saying it has no value, but it has less value when your team is tired. In fact, I could probably make an argument that by giving the Cowboys extra yardage, you're actually producing more wear on the defense. So I think it becomes a situation where you really needed to try and go for that one. Really needed to try and go for that one and seal the game right there. Wouldn't have absolutely done it. They would have needed another first down or two. Kick a field goal would have been very close to putting the game away, and that would have taken one more first down at least. But they had 3 yards to go, and I guarantee you that if you looked at Ben Baldwin bot, and I haven't done this yet, but that it would say that it would have been a go for it situation and not a punt situation. I think, in fact, you can make the argument the punt might have been the worst of those options because the other thing that was on the table was a 58-yard field goal from Tucker there, which I'm okay not declining that one.
That's tough to do. That's tough to trot him out. Stout had been having a nice second half with his punts, I had felt like. But again, like you said, to me, it's also kind of this visceral thing that Harbaugh, you would expect him to tap into, this step on their necks mentality. Don't give them the chance, and instead giving them the chance. And you made another great point there with, push them back really far, yes, but then your defense has the whole field to cover. And
they might be out there for 6 extra plays.
Right. And so you look at that and you're saying, okay, well, there's a safe option. It has these downsides. There's an aggressive option. It has these downsides. To me, the aggressive option typically, analytics-wise, tends to be the right one. And I also think, again, even away from analytics, there was a physical feel to this game. The Ravens were owning the line of scrimmage. Derrick Henry in the fourth quarter is a bludgeon for defenses. And to me, that is the magic of Derrick Henry, is not just when he's able to bounce off 4 defenders in the second quarter. It's when the entire defense just doesn't want to deal with him anymore in the fourth quarter. And I feel like that was those are missed opportunities for the Ravens that a team that is so good in short yardage just should not be passing up.
It's interesting. In the fourth quarter, actually, it's really Lamar's running that put the game away. Now, Henry did have a good 6-yard run on the drive where they ended up getting to 4th and 3, but most of that is Lamar making one good rollout pass he moved a little bit to throw to Bateman on the sideline that got the first down, and then Lamar making the own take the ball into your own hands run to put the game away on, what was it, 2nd and 9 or something at the very end. We need to move on here, but I think we can agree that there's adaptability and things we'd like to see done differently with Harbaugh in the coming games as far as that goes. And by the way, I'm not at all critical. No, that's not true. I am sometimes critical of John Harbaugh, but I'm generally, I think the criticism of John Harbaugh is far overdone. And if you want to blame him for all the failures of an offensive or defensive coordinator, then I think you have to give him credit for all the success of the offensive or defensive coordinator.
Yeah, this is the last thing on this point. I go back and forth on Harbaugh. I think to me, it's when I see the same issues. We didn't see any like really, really bad clock management this game, for example. That was a plus, right? We still saw a special teams mishap. And I feel like, again, there are times where he is so busy trying to get an explanation for a call or figure out why a call was made with officiating that almost a play or two after that is not wasted, but it just feels like the full attention is not on the ensuing plays. And so I think with Harbaugh, there's, like you said, there's a lot of credit that's due to him. But I also think there are some ways in which, I don't want to say the modern game has passed him by, but I think that he can, like you said, be more adaptable to the situation and be a little bit less rigid in what he thinks coming into a game.
All right, let's move on here. I want to talk about the run defense briefly. I think we did earlier, but the Cowboys only ran the ball for 2 first downs the whole game compared to 16 for the Ravens. That's the biggest thing for me. One of those was the Prescott 1 yard QB sneak for the touchdown. So that's it. They didn't have much at all. 3.2 yards per play, along with only 6 yards compared to 16 first downs and 274 yards for the Ravens.
Yeah, just what you expected coming into this game. The pendulum of do running backs matters swings back and forth almost every week, because you go and look at that Dallas running back room and you're like, I'm not scared of that rushing game, because even if they can get some push up front, those running backs are not consistently not making the most out of their opportunities. They're not picking up yards after contact. And you feel comfortable with your tackling and your physicality in the trenches. You basically dare them to run the ball. And the Cowboys didn't run the ball because they knew how much they struggled with it. And that, again, played into what we were talking about earlier with the Ravens' desire to play dime. I think the Ravens' rush defense, I know the Ravens' rush defense has been the best in the NFL over the first 3 weeks, allowing 50 yards per game. And it's funny that comes after Roquan talking about taking away the run against the Chiefs. That comment that drew a lot of aggregation across Twitter, X, the internet, whatever. And people saying, oh, like, why would you want to force Patrick Mahomes to throw the football? Well, it's what we were talking about earlier. You get in obvious passing situations, and that really unlocks what Orr can do with this defense. He gets them in the dime more often. The pass rushers can really pin their ears back and go after the quarterback. And I think we saw that plenty against Dallas. When you know they're going to pass the ball, the pass rushers get off was a lot better to me than against the Raiders, when the Raiders were having a much more mixed attack, even though they weren't having as much success with the run. But by getting Dallas completely away from the run, you are just putting your players in almost a mental advantage where they're just what they need to look out for is just limited to passing cues more and more often. When you're able to do that, you actually make life a lot easier for your defense, even though you're going up against guys like Mahomes and Prescott, who are very good at throwing the ball. It still doesn't matter when they can't get guys open.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and it makes defense a lot easier when you know you've only got the pass coming. That's for sure. Did have a question from a listener that I wanted to get to, and it relates to a weakness for the Ravens that has shown up in recent games. So they had 9 passes defensed against Dallas and 0 interceptions. For the year, they've now got 16 passes defensed and 2 interceptions, which is a very low conversion rate. One every 8, obviously, you can do the math there. But the third in the NFL in passes defensed and only tied for 11th, and it's a wide swath because 11 and 21 have 2 interceptions. All that group in the middle of the league, effectively. So they're not converting enough of their passes defense into interceptions. This is completely contrary to the personnel, the zone heaviness, to a lot of who they are as defenses. They've got playmaker after playmaker on their defense. Both inside linebackers, I think, with having an extra safety background. All the corners, with the exception of really Stevens, who's really a react to the hands rather than react to the ball guy. And I think both of their safeties fall into the category. Hamilton certainly is a guy who's a vacuum cleaner for the ball. They have a ton of playmaking talent, and they're not coming down with the football as much as we'd hope early on. All right.
Yeah, I think that's hard to pinpoint. I think that you hit on the big thing, which is the zone coverages suggest that when they're getting pass breakups, they're getting their hands on a ball, there either should be more guys around the play or in the general passing lane that can make a play. I do think there is just a lot of luck on it. And I do think that defensive backs are typically taught to deflect balls down. You're trying to get your hand on the ball, but if you can put it in one direction or the other, you're trying to spike it down. And so I think those are 2 factors that come into it. The luck side of it is also it feels like they are focused a little bit more on the receiver at the catch point than always the ball. I don't know if that's a change big time from recent years, but I do think that they're really focused on not allowing yards after the catch if the guy is able to come down with the ball. So I think those 2 things come into play. It's something that limits the ceiling and like really, really high upside of this defense. Obviously, takeaways can be extremely volatile year to year, and the Ravens led the league in takeaways last year, and that was a big part of that defense's success. I'm curious to see if we see more and more takeaways as the season goes on. They still had one today. They weren't able to pick off Prescott, although I will say he can be a difficult quarterback to pick off when he is able to sort through his coverages. But I think the conversion rate is the kind of thing that you'd love to see. Honestly, just the hands get better too.
Yeah, it's too small a sample size for me to be really worried about later. But we do appreciate the question from Dazzling Slide on Reddit. But it's not all luck. It's a lot scheme. Zone defense. The point I was making is that the big thing you hear about zone defense is you have eyes on the football and eyes on the quarterback. But that also means eyes on the football. As soon as that football's out, it's following that, and that gives you chances that man coverage doesn't, to rally to the football and to play the tip drill game. And defenders at the line of scrimmage in particular, they need to be very focused on batting the ball up and not down. Okay, very focused on that, because there's a lot more gain from batting the ball up. And I think in general, they may not feel like they have a choice, or they get it with their arm, like Brent Urban usually does on his PDs, and it goes off the side, and they didn't really have a chance to decide where that ball was going because they weren't using their palm. The other component of this that was really present on the 23 Ravens, is not present on the 24 team, is you don't have the same sort of loose bracket safety in Geno Stone. First of all, I don't think Eddie Jackson is talented. He has maybe some of those characteristics, although he's adapting to a new role to be a split field safety, hopefully more limited, that he's going to be effective at. That is a question so far. But Geno Stone is a loose bracket safety in the mold of Ed Reed, a guy who's really looking for the overthrow. The guy who's on the opposite end of the spectrum from that, who always goes like a guided missile to the body, was Deshaun Elliott. Effective safety for the most part, but he limited his upside value because he's always trying to hammer the guy in the midsection for a PD rather than go for the ball.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to look at is some of the rotations that the Ravens had at their cornerback units. Some guys moving in different positions, Marlon sliding into the slot. almost like the priority of trying to get interception not goes down, but I think that sometimes in all the adjustments, you're just so focused on, making sure you got your assignment straight, getting your head around that you don't even have a second to think, get this ball, bat this ball, get the other hand up. You're just trying to make a play. So again, like you said, it's not something to be worried about, but I think that point about Geno Stone was really solid about, a ball gets tipped and sails, 5-10 yards past a guy and Stone might clean that up. It's not the case with Eddie Jackson. And I agree. I don't think he's been as effective as you would have liked to see early on in the year. I don't think Marcus Williams has been as effective as we'd like either.
Yeah, that was another question that came out that I want to give credit for was, where is the effectiveness of our safeties gone? Let me see. I think it's from King Khalid, but I want to make sure I get this right. Yeah, I'll give it to you here as he says it. It's from King Khalid on Twitter. He says, quick question, where the hell are our safeties, excluding Hamilton? But man, I feel like Williams and Jackson haven't made a play on the ball yet, nor have they had the post-play adjustments to know how to attack the ball in the middle of the field where teams have been throwing it. Between the linebackers in front of the safeties, every passing down we give up, we give up or deep throw attempt seems like a one-on-one situation, no safeties in sight. That's all he has to say there. So it's a quite an indictment there. I actually thought we saw some improvement in a couple of ways in this game. I thought they did a pretty good job of erasing routes later in the game. I mean, they really held Lamb in check. I mean, for Lamb to have a fumble and 67 total yards on what was it? It was still only about 7 targets. So it's good yards per target, but they punched the ball out on him. And when one of the plays that I really looked at in this game and I said, yeah, this is good to see this, was Jackson coming downhill to try and take away that shallow cross where he had Humphrey trailing. And I don't have a time reference on me, but it's in my article if you want to look at that, where he got there in time to make a really vicious tackle on Lamb, but Lamb had already dropped the football. Fortunately, it was one of these situations where that rotation I really appreciated.
Yeah, and I think one thing they did with you don't see the safeties, and the reason the middle of the field, the short middle of the field was open so much is they really worked on doubling Lamb deep and having safety help over the top. They were not going to let the Cowboys beat them over the top with CeeDee Lamb. They did not beat them over the top with CeeDee Lamb. So I think that's one kind of thing where, you see the end play and you see the safeties nowhere near. Sometimes that means they were out of position. Other times it just means they were doing their job elsewhere. So I felt like they did a pretty good job on Lamb with that. I think there was another question about the Tolbert TD that we can get to later, but I think that was there's another example of, kind of targeting the safeties. I think the safety usage, again, was a little bit of an adjustment from Orr. I think he was closing the middle of the field a little bit more often with the safeties than he had in previous games. But again, playing against a guy like Lamb, you can't let him beat you over the top. And they really did devote a lot of safety help to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think they were coming up with ways to do that. I want to talk briefly and notionally about the packages. Now, if you want real detail on the packages, it's in my article. Go there. There are a lot of you package nerds who really want to hear all that stuff week to week. I do love looking at that stuff myself, so I put some effort into doing it. But I'll say the big effectiveness of the dime package in this game was the big single substitution it allows, which is Ardarius Washington in, Trenton Simpson out. That is a massive improvement to your pass coverage. Now, it's not a 1-for-1 substitution. It's more like a a one move plus one insertion substitution like you see in baseball. Well, he's going in center field. No, center fielder was moving to left field. Hamilton moved to dime in this game. Played very little in the way of big nickel. They only played 9 plays of big nickel in this game. And the rest of the time, Hamilton was on the back end. So he was either dime and strong safety primarily with only 9 snaps in the middle. And Ardarius Washington had one bodacious game, despite the fact that he allowed the last Dallas touchdown. That was a very difficult throw to defend, by the way, but he was otherwise absolutely astounding in this game.
Yeah, credit where it's due. Prescott threw open, I believe that was Brandon Cooks on that touchdown. A corner route, Washington had the right leverage, but Prescott actually saw where that back shoulder on the inside was going to open up and threw him open. Cooks was not headed to that spot. It was when he turned and saw the ball and he made a good adjustment. And that is a very tough play to defend. Like you said, credit where it's due. I say this, after a win, I like watching Dak Prescott play quarterback. It was kind of cool to see him go up against this defense, such a cerebral guy. But Ardarius, I was watching with some friends who are not as deep into the Ravens as I am. And I was telling them how proudly this guy is 5'8", and he is just putting the clamps on CeeDee Lamb. He's not playing like a guy who's 5'8" playing against a $140 million receiver. It was the kind of performance that when you watch Darius Washington's college tape years back, you could see that grit and you could see that adaptability in a game, his ability to just stand across from a guy, look up 6 inches at him and say, I'm going to take you on. That's really what he did. And you could feel the emotionality in his game. You could feel him feeding off of his own success and how much the team was celebrating around him because they put him in tough spots. They put him in one-on-one coverage with CeeDee Lamb out of the slot. That is probably a top 5 slot receiver in the NFL. He was the best slot receiver in the NFL last year. He has not been as effective this year. His yards per route run has dropped substantially, probably dropped even after this game. And even on some plays where I don't know if Lamb beat Washington directly on any plays, but even on some plays where Lamb got free, it felt like Washington was coming in to make the play. I think that is a great adjustment by Orr to put a player who is so kind of interestingly versatile. He played some safety. He played a good bit of like regular traditional safety in training camp, but his real comfort position is in the nickel because it allows him to play a little bit more downhill. It allows him to run with guys in coverage. And his ability to get up and make some pass breakups against a guy who's substantially bigger than him was really, really remarkable.
Yeah, he did. The play that I really loved was the very first one I've got on my notes about him, which is when he tackled Ferguson. Now, Ferguson outweighs him by 60 pounds, roughly. And he's a tight end for starter. He's the big Dallas tight end at this point in their team history. And he drove him back for a 6+0 PM6. So 6-yard pass, 6 on the throw, 0 on the yak, and he drove him backwards. It was just a beautiful thing to see. And my concern about playing him at safety has been the tackling. It really hasn't been the seeing the field. I think what we've seen in training camp has been outstanding in terms of his ability to find the football, his ability to read the opposing QB, even though it's a Ravens QB, it's not quite the same. But he's shown, a good ability to be in the right place at the right time. My fear has been tackling, and that we don't get to see in training camp because they don't tackle each other. Basically, they just kind of touch them and are they don't tackle anyway. So a difficult projection to make him at safety, but based on this Dallas game, I could see it. I could see him if Eddie Jackson doesn't work out, maybe going into that role.
And I like how much on the same page we are, because I was just about to say this is the kind of thing that Orr can see and say, okay, what more can we do with you? So we know you're comfortable sliding into that role. We know what that enables to do with Kyle Hamilton. One thing I always like to mention when we're talking about defense and defensive versatility is something that Mike Macdonald said at a press conference a couple years ago. He talked about guys like Marlon, like Brandon Stevens, even like Ardarius, who their ability to slide into a couple positions really unlocks the versatility of a weapon like Hamilton, because you have competency and you can switch assignments and switch coverages and still free up Hamilton to do all the things you want him to do. And I think that Washington could really close in on a bigger role as the season goes on. Again, going back to him at TCU, the knock on him was his size, but that did not stop him from taking defenders down. Now, the size translating obviously is a big question, but we're seeing that it does.
Yeah, it's this was a great game for him. There's a really, really big breakthrough game in terms of having a lot of big plays. I think I could see a bigger role, and you're absolutely right in terms of what he does for other players to unlock that value. Humphrey has a lot of the same value, but Humphrey's like a trump card you can only use once. He's probably he's the ace of trumps. You'd like to have a king and a queen of trumps too, to be that much more sure of things. And then that allows you to move Hamilton wherever you like. If you want to use Hamilton at dime, you can use him there. If you think he's better at strong safety to make plays, use him there. And if it's kind of a last resort, but having him off ball at that split safety position, Hamilton's still a very useful player. He can play that position well. I don't think it's where you get the maximum offensive value out of him as a defender. Okay, let's move on a little bit. One of the Ravens were a little bit limited in this game, and I didn't realize this at the time, but Armour Davis was injured. I don't have any details on that. Have you seen any details about the type of injury?
I have not seen any details on the details on that injury. I don't believe John Harbaugh. I'm not even sure if he was asked about it during his presser today.
Yeah, might not have been, because you got to pick your spots in terms of asking John Harbaugh about injuries, obviously. I think we will save the pass rush for the second part. We'll start off with that, and then we'll talk about some individual player discussion. But Nick, really appreciate you joining me. First time on the show here. Tell folks where they can read your work or contact you online if they want to talk football.
Folks can read my work on russellstreetreport.com. I do battle plans every week, which is a big preview of the upcoming game. You like to use a lot of analytics and stats in that. So you can find me there. I also have a podcast with them, Russell Street Replay. And on Twitter, you can find me at Nick, N-I-K, Noseball. Hopefully you think I do.
All right. Outstanding. Appreciate you coming on. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study Short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I want to hear from you. And this is the way I find new people like Nick, say, that I want to talk about, I want to bring on a regular show, is to have a short with them, determine what their level of understanding is, and determine if this is somebody who wants to be on regularly or included in series like the Expectation series that we have every summer. So if you'd like to be on that, if it's just something fun you'd like to do, the conversation, as you hear it between Nick and me, is about as animated as it ever gets in terms of a back and forth. This is a very easygoing back and forth conversation in terms of football. And, we genuinely like to talk about the sport, and we're not going to make you feel bad, I promise, for coming on. So anyway, appreciate the loyalty of all the listeners, all you've done over the years. I really appreciate. As always, if you want to write a 50-word review, go out and do that on your favorite podcast platform. Nick, thanks again for coming on. And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.